"Dad, you're nothing but a financial burden." The words weren't shouted. There was no anger in his voice, just cold, calculated dismissal. My son Marcus stood in the doorway of his gleaming corner office, designer suit perfectly pressed, while I sat across from his mahogany desk, the termination papers for my consulting position still warm from the printer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. I tilted my head, slightly, waiting for some hint of regret to flicker across his face, some sign this wasn't happening. But his expression remained unmoved, like I was simply a line item he'd decided to cut from his budget. I had given this boy everything. Sacrificed my retirement savings for his MBA, worked double shifts to pay for his first apartment, cosigned loans for his first business venture. Now, sitting in the very building I had secretly purchased 5 years ago as an investment property, I was being told I no longer had financial value. I wanted to speak, to remind him of everything, but no words came. Instead, I nodded slowly. A small, dignified nod, the kind you give to a stranger in passing, not your only son. "I understand," I said quietly, gathering my belongings. I slipped the company ID from my wallet and placed it on his desk. "I'll clear out my things." He barely looked up from his computer. "HR will contact you about your final paycheck. It's best if you're gone by lunch." I didn't argue in that glass-walled office. I didn't break down. I walked out with my head high, past the curious glances of coworkers who'd just witnessed my dismissal by my own flesh and blood. It wasn't until I reached the privacy of the elevator that I allowed myself a single thought that had never once crossed my mind in 62 years. My son sees me as nothing but a liability. Before we continue with my story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful real-life stories that might just change your perspective on family, success, and redemption. Before that dreadful moment in Marcus's office, before the termination papers, the dismissal, and the word burden, there had been decades of something else entirely. There had been love. There had been pride. There had been countless moments that made me believe my son and I shared an unbreakable bond. Marcus was born when I was 36. I had already built a modest accounting practice in downtown Portland, serving small businesses and startups with personalized financial guidance. His mother left when he was just 4, deciding family life wasn't compatible with her career ambitions. After that, it was just the two of us navigating life together. I didn't date much after the divorce. I didn't take exotic vacations or buy myself luxury watches. Every extra dollar went into Marcus's future. The best schools, summer programs in business and finance, private tutors when he struggled with advanced mathematics. I worked weekends, holidays, tax seasons that blurred into exhaustion, all to ensure he would have opportunities I never had. I still remember sitting in the bleachers during his high school debate competitions, watching him articulate complex economic theories with the confidence of someone twice his age. My chest would swell with such pride it almost hurt. "That's my son," I'd whisper to whoever sat beside me, probably annoying them with my unabashed paternal admiration. When he was accepted to Wharton for his undergraduate degree, I sold our family home and downsized to a small apartment to cover what the scholarships didn't. The day I drove him to campus, he hugged me with unexpected emotion. "I'm going to make you proud, Dad," he promised. "One day, I'll take care of you the way you've taken care of me." I believed him with every fiber of my being. After business, school came his MBA from Stanford, then a succession of increasingly prestigious positions at financial firms. Each step up the corporate ladder was celebrated with dinner at our favorite local restaurant, where he'd enthusiastically outline his latest accomplishments and plans for the future. I'd listen, occasionally offering advice when asked, but mostly just basking in the glow of his success. When Marcus announced his plans to start his own investment firm 5 years ago, I was 67 and preparing for retirement. I had accumulated a modest portfolio of investments and savings, enough to ensure I wouldn't be a burden in my old age. Or so I thought. "Dad, this is the opportunity of a lifetime," he explained over dinner, eyes bright with ambition. "I've found the perfect building downtown. 10 stories, recently renovated, prime location. I can secure most of the funding, but I need a bit more capital to make it happen." "How much are you short?" I asked, mentally reviewing my accounts. "About $2 million, he said casually, as though discussing pocket change. I nearly choked on my water. "Marcus, that's almost everything I have saved for retirement." "I know it sounds like a lot," he said, reaching across the table to grasp my hand. "But think of it as an investment in both our futures. The firm will take off, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. You'll never have to worry about money again. You could even work with me. We'll finally be partners." The idea was seductive. Father and son, building something together. Wasn't that what I had worked for all these years? A chance for us to stand side by side as equals? What Marcus didn't know, what I decided not to tell him that night, was that I had already been eyeing that very building as an investment property. My financial advisor had brought it to my attention months earlier, suggesting it would be a stable source of retirement income. I had the paperwork nearly completed. That night, I made a decision that would ultimately save me, though I didn't know it then. I contacted my attorney the next morning and proceeded with the purchase of the building, but through a separate holding company that couldn't be traced back to me. I then loaned Marcus the money he needed for his startup costs, with the understanding that he would lease office space in the building from what he believed was an anonymous corporate landlord. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was the first time in my life I had kept a significant secret from my son. Something in my gut, some primal parental instinct perhaps, told me to maintain this separate safety net. In the beginning, our professional partnership seemed like a dream realized. Marcus named his firm Horizon Capital and took the entire 8th floor of the building. He gave me an office with a view of Mount Hood and introduced me to clients as the financial genius who taught me everything I know. I handled the firm's accounting, bringing decades of experience to ensure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. For the first 2 years, we had lunch together most days. He sought my advice on investment strategies, client relationships, personnel decisions. I felt valued, respected, needed. The dream of father and son building something lasting together seemed to be coming true. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The lunches became less frequent. When I stopped by his office with questions, his responses grew increasingly curt. "Just handle it, Dad. I trust you," he'd say without looking up from his computer. But it didn't feel like trust. It felt like dismissal. In meetings, he began to introduce me differently. No longer the financial genius, but our senior accountant, or sometimes just Richard from accounting. The first time it happened, I felt a small pinch in my chest, but I brushed it aside. He was establishing himself as the leader. That was natural, expected even. By the 3rd year, I noticed other changes too. Marcus had hired several young, ambitious financial analysts from prestigious firms. They arrived with sleek presentations, contemporary methodologies, and an unspoken disdain for what they clearly viewed as my outdated approaches. In the break room, conversations would halt when I entered, resuming only when I left with my cup of coffee. One afternoon, I overheard Marcus speaking to Elise, his new CFO, a sharp woman with impeccable credentials and a perpetual look of mild impatience. "How much longer do you think you'll keep your dad on?" she asked, not realizing I was around the corner. Marcus sighed. "It's complicated. He invested a lot to get us started. But honestly, his methods are becoming a liability. Clients want cutting-edge strategies, not old-school accounting." Family and business, Elise replied. Always messy. I quietly retreated to my office, the conversation replaying in my mind. A liability. The word stung in ways I couldn't articulate. Still, I told myself I was being oversensitive. Marcus was under tremendous pressure. The firm was growing rapidly, taking on higher-profile clients with complex needs. Evolution was necessary. I needed to adapt or risk becoming exactly what Elise implied, a burden carried out of obligation rather than value. I enrolled in online courses to update my skills. I studied contemporary financial modeling software late into the night. I read industry publications cover to cover, determined to prove my worth. When I presented my new knowledge in meetings, Marcus would nod with what seemed like surprised approval, but the invitations to contribute became increasingly rare. By the 4th year, my role had been effectively reduced to managing the firm's internal accounting. Glorified bookkeeping, really. My office, once positioned near Marcus's with its magnificent view, was relocated to a smaller space 3 doors down, the mountain now just a sliver between neighboring buildings. It makes more sense logistically, Marcus explained when I questioned the move. The accounting team needs to be centralized. The accounting team. As though I were just another employee, not his father, not a founding investor. That Christmas, Marcus hosted a lavish holiday party at his new lakefront home, a stunning contemporary structure of glass and steel that he had never invited me to visit prior to the event. I arrived early, hoping for a few moments of personal connection before the crowd arrived. "Dad," he greeted me at the door, checks already flushed from champagne. "You're early. The caterers are still setting up." "I thought we could catch up a bit," I said, handing him a carefully wrapped gift. A rare first edition of his favorite finance book I'd tracked down through a collector. "Oh, right," he said, placing the package on a side table without opening it. "Listen, can you do me a favor? My assistant ordered the wrong champagne. Could you run to the wine shop on Madison and pick up several cases of Veuve Clicquot? The guests will be arriving soon." I stood there, coat still on, errand list replacing the conversation I'd hoped for. It wasn't the request itself that bothered me. I would have done anything for him. It was the way he asked. Not as a son asking his father for help, but as an employer delegating a menial task to someone beneath him. As the party progressed, I watched Marcus work the room, confidently discussing market projections with Portland's business elite. He was magnetic, polished, entirely in his element. I felt a complicated mixture of pride and invisibility, standing near the catering table with a glass of the champagne I'd fetched. When Marcus finally made his way to me, it was with a client in tow, an older gentleman with shrewd eyes and a calculating smile. "Walter, this is Richard, our senior accountant," Marcus said, the words "my father" conspicuously absent. "Richard, Walter is considering moving his substantial portfolio to Horizon." Walter squinted at me. "Aren't you a bit seasoned to be keeping up with today's financial algorithms?" Before I could respond, Marcus laughed smoothly. "Richard handles our internal books. Very traditional, very reliable. The real magic happens with our analytics team. Let me introduce you to Elise." As they walked away, I stood frozen, the champagne turning sour in my mouth. In that moment, I realized I had become something I never expected, an embarrassment to my own son. The next morning, alone in my modest apartment, I pulled out the financial records for the building, my building, that housed Horizon Capital. The rent had been steadily increasing as the area gentrified, and the property value had nearly doubled since my purchase. Marcus had no idea he was paying premium rent to his own father, financing the retirement he was now making me feel unworthy of claiming. For a moment, I considered revealing everything. Imagined the shock on his face when he realized the anonymous corporate landlord was actually his increasingly marginalized father. But something held me back. Some instinct told me to wait, to watch, to gather more information before showing my hand. The truth was, I still loved my son. I still wanted to believe that somewhere beneath the tailored suits and calculated networking was the boy who had once promised to take care of me the way I had taken care of him. I needed to understand what had changed, or perhaps more accurately, what had changed him. Little did I know, events were already in motion that would force my hand sooner than I anticipated. The building I owned, the foundation beneath my son's growing empire, was about to become the battleground for something far more valuable than real estate: my dignity. The signs were subtle at first, like the gradual shifting of tides before a tsunami. After the holiday party, Marcus began excluding me from client meetings entirely. "They're looking for cutting-edge strategies, Dad," he'd explain with practiced patience. "Your traditional approach confuses the message we're trying to send." Each explanation was delivered with the same condescending tone one might use with an elderly relative who keeps asking the same question. I adapted as best I could, focusing on the internal accounting where my expertise was still tolerated. I arrived early each morning, making coffee for the office before most employees arrived. I stayed late, reviewing numbers that increasingly felt like my only connection to the firm I had helped build. Occasionally, I'd glance up from my desk to see Marcus walking past with investors, his stride confident, not even acknowledging my presence with a nod. One Tuesday morning, I received an email from Human Resources, a department that consisted of one person, Vanessa, who had been hired the previous month. The message was clinical. "Please attend a departmental restructuring meeting this afternoon, 2 p.m., Conference Room B." I arrived 5 minutes early to find Marcus and Elise already seated, their expressions professionally neutral. A folder sat before each of them. A third folder waited at the seat across from them. "Dad?" Marcus began, then caught himself. "Richard, thank you for joining us." The shift to my first name in a professional setting shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. But it signaled a complete separation, a compartmentalization of our relationship. In this room, I wasn't his father who had sacrificed everything. I was just Richard, an aging accountant whose methods were becoming inconvenient. "As you know," he continued, sliding the folder toward me, "Horizon Capital is evolving rapidly. Our client base has grown 140% in the past year. We're attracting institutional investors who expect sophisticated financial modeling and algorithmic trading strategies." I nodded, opening the folder to find a reorganization chart. My position had been moved from its already diminished place to a small box labeled Legacy Accounts Supervisor. Below it were no staff, no connections to other departments. "We're creating a more streamlined accounting division," Elise explained, her voice professionally sympathetic. "We've contracted with Rahman and Associates to handle the advanced modeling and compliance reporting our new clients require." "I see," I said quietly, studying the chart that effectively isolated me from the core functions of the firm. "And what exactly will the Legacy Account Supervisor be responsible for?" "Marcus." And Elise exchanged a quick glance. "You'll manage the original client accounts, the smaller portfolios from our early days. It's important work," Marcus added hastily. "Those clients trust you." What he didn't say was equally clear. Those smaller accounts were being phased out, gracefully pushed toward the exit as Horizon pursued bigger fish. I was being given a title to manage relationships that the firm no longer valued. "There's also the matter of compensation adjustments," Elise continued, flipping to the next page in my folder. "Given the reduced scope of responsibilities." I stared at the number on the page. My salary had been cut by 40%, nearly half. My income gone with the stroke of a pen. "This is effective immediately?" I asked, proud that my voice remained steady. "Starting next pay period," Marcus replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "The firm is investing heavily in new technologies and talent. We need to reallocate resources accordingly." Resources. That's what I had become. A resource to be reallocated, reduced, eventually eliminated. Not a father who had given up his retirement security. Not a man who had dedicated his life to his son's success. I closed the folder carefully. I understand. We knew you would, Elise said with a professional smile. You've always been practical about business matters. The meeting concluded with perfunctory handshakes. Marcus was already checking his phone as I left the conference room, my future diminished, my presence already forgotten. That evening, alone in my apartment, I spread out all my financial documents across the kitchen table. The building ownership, papers. The original investment in Horizon, my dwindling personal savings. With my drastically reduced salary, I would be operating at a deficit within 6 months. The rental income from the building was my only safety net, the one thing Marcus couldn't touch because he didn't know it existed. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something beyond hurt. Something like anger. Not hot and explosive, but slow burning and clarifying. I had given Marcus everything, my money, my expertise, my unwavering support, and in return, he had decided I was dispensable. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find my security badge wouldn't open the main entrance. After 3 failed attempts, I had to call the receptionist to let me in. "Oh, Mr. Harmon," she said apologetically. "Didn't you get the email? All access credentials were reset during the system upgrade last night. You need to see Vanessa for your new badge." When I reached Human Resources, Vanessa handed me a new badge with restricted access. "You'll only need entry to the accounting wing and common areas," she explained. "The new security protocols limit access based on departmental need." I was being systematically contained, my movements within the building, my building, now, monitored and restricted. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Over the next few weeks, my isolation intensified. My office was relocated yet again, this time to a windowless interior room that had previously been used for storage. My email was migrated to a new system, where I discovered most company-wide communications no longer included me. My phone rarely rang. Even the cleaning staff seemed to forget my office existed, the trash bin overflowing until I emptied it myself. One afternoon, I overheard 2 young analysts talking in the break room. "Who's the old guy in the back office?" one asked. "Marcus's dad," the other replied. "He's kind of a company charity case, founded the firm with Marcus or something, but he's completely outdated now, doesn't understand modern finance at all." Why keep him around? A shrug. Family. Obligation, I guess. But I heard Elise saying they're phasing him out completely by year-end. I retreated before they could see me, my coffee forgotten on the counter. Phasing me out completely. A charity case. The words burrowed into my consciousness. Impossible to dislodge. That evening, I pulled out my lease agreement with Horizon Capital. As the building owner, I had included several specific clauses that now seemed almost prescient. The most significant, any substantial change to the company's financial structure or leadership required notification and approval from the landlord. A violation would constitute grounds for immediate lease review. Marcus had never read the fine print. He had signed where his lawyers told him to sign, assuming it was standard boilerplate. He had no idea that his recent restructuring, his marginalization of his own father, was technically a breach of his lease agreement. I didn't sleep that night. The question kept me awake. Was I ready to use this leverage? To potentially damage my son's business? To reveal the secret I had kept for 5 years? The answer came the very next day, delivered with a casualness that felt like the final straw. Marcus stopped by my windowless office, leaning against the doorframe with his hands in his pockets. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something." My heart lifted momentarily. Perhaps he had reconsidered. Perhaps some recognition of our relationship, our history, had finally penetrated his ambition. The firm is hosting a major investment summit next month, he continued. Top clients, potential investors, industry leaders. It's going to be a significant opportunity for us. That sounds promising, I said, waiting for the connection to me. The thing is, he hesitated, examining his manicured fingernails. We're presenting Horizon as a forward-thinking, technologically advanced firm. Our messaging needs to be consistent. And, I prompted, though I already sensed where this was heading. It might be best if you took some time off during the summit. Paid leave, of course. We just can't risk having potential investors question our cutting-edge approach if they meet. Someone as outdated as me, I finished for him. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. It's just optics, Dad. Business strategy. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. As if asking your father to disappear because he doesn't fit your polished image was anything but deeply, irrevocably personal. I understand, I said, my voice steady. When is this summit? 2 weeks from Thursday. We'll need you to take that entire week off. I nodded, already making calculations in my mind. Will do. Great, he said, relieved that I hadn't made it difficult. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. We're going to need your office temporarily for the new data analytics team. They're arriving next week and need the space. Facilities will help you relocate to the shared workspace in the East Wing. Not even a private office now, just a desk. In a communal area, easily packed up and removed when necessary. Of course, I replied, my decision crystallizing with each casual indignity. Whatever the company needs. After Marcus left, I sat motionless for several minutes, letting the full weight of my son's dismissal settle over me. Then I reached for my phone and called my attorney. Grace, I said when she answered, I need to execute Plan B for the 8th Avenue property, immediately. Are you sure, Richard? She asked, knowing what this meant. Once we initiate, there's no going back. I'm sure, I replied, surprising myself with how certain I felt. It's time. The next morning, I arrived at the office 1 hour earlier than usual. The building was silent, still dark except for security lighting. Using my restricted access badge, I made my way to my soon-to-be former office and began packing my personal belongings into a cardboard box I had brought from home. Photos, books, the few mementos I had kept to remind me of who I was beyond these walls. As I worked, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Not just the recent years of gradual exclusion, but the decades before. The nights I had sat beside Marcus's bed, helping him tackle complex math problems. The weekends spent teaching him to analyze business models in local shops we visited. The pride that had swelled in me when he took those lessons and soared beyond anything I could have imagined. Where had I gone wrong? Had my support been too unconditional? Had I failed to teach him that success built on discarded relationships was no success at all? I placed the last item in my box, a small stone paperweight Marcus had given me for Father's Day when he was 9. Dad, you're my rock, the childish card had read. I almost left it behind, then changed my mind, wrapping it carefully in tissue paper before placing it in my pocket. At precisely 7:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. All executed. Control transfers to you as of 9 a.m. I took a deep breath and made my way to the executive floor. Marcus's assistant wasn't at her desk yet. She rarely arrived before 8:30. I walked into his corner office, taking in the expensive minimalist furniture, the awards displayed prominently on floating shelves, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing. The city he thought he was conquering. I placed a single envelope in the center of his glass desk and left. By 8:45, I was seated in the small conference room of my attorney's office across town. Grace had arranged for a security team, a locksmith, and representatives from the property management company to meet us there. At exactly 9, she made a call, speaking in clipped, precise legal terms. When she hung up, she nodded to me. It's done. The building is now under direct management of Harmon Holdings. You personally. All security codes have been reset. The locks on Horizon Capital's floor are being changed as we speak. And the notification? I asked. Being delivered electronically and in person right now. Horizon Capital has been found in breach of their lease agreement due to undisclosed structural changes. They have 4 hours to vacate the premises. 4 hours. It seemed both merciful and merciless simultaneously. Enough time to gather essential items, not enough time to formulate a strategic response. What do you think he'll do? Grace asked. I stared out her office window, watching the city come to life below. He'll call me. He'll be furious, confused, probably frightened once the initial shock wears off. He'll want to know how this happened. And when he finds out you're behind, I turned to meet her concerned gaze. That's the moment that matters. That's when I'll know if there's anything left to salvage. My phone rang at 10:27 a.m. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. I answered on the third ring. Dad? His voice was tight, controlled fury barely contained. What the hell is happening? There are security guards in our office telling everyone to pack up. Something about a lease violation? Yes, I said calmly. Horizon Capital is in breach of its lease agreement. That's impossible. We've made every payment on time. This has to be a mistake. It's not about payments, Marcus. It's about structural changes to the company's financial organization. Section 12, paragraph 4 of your lease requires notification and approval for such changes. There was a moment of stunned silence. How do you know what's in our lease? Because I wrote it, I said simply. I own the building, Marcus. I've owned it since before Horizon Capital existed. The silence that followed was profound. I could almost see him putting the pieces together. The money I had loaned him, the anonymous holding company, the carefully worded lease he had signed without reading. This doesn't make any sense, he finally said, his voice smaller. Why wouldn't you tell me? I thought I might need protection someday, I replied. Apparently I was right. Protection? From what? From exactly what's happening right now. From being discarded when I became inconvenient. He began to protest, but I continued, my voice level. You've systematically pushed me out of the company I helped you build. You've cut my salary, taken away my office, excluded me from meetings, and most recently, asked me to disappear entirely during your investment summit because I don't fit the image you're trying to project. That was business, Dad, not personal. Treating your father like a liability is very personal, Marcus. Calling me a financial burden is personal. I never called you. You did. Not in those exact words, but in every action, every decision, every dismissive interaction over the past year. The line went quiet except for his breathing, faster now. What do you want? He finally asked. I want you to come to Grace Arlington's office, alone. We have things to discuss. Dad, I can't just leave. The entire firm is in chaos. We have clients calling, employees panicking. 1 hour, Marcus, or the eviction stands and Horizon Capital ceases to exist by the end of the day. I ended the call, my hand surprisingly steady. For the first time in years, I was the one setting the terms. Grace looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Are you okay? I considered the question carefully. Was I okay? I had just upended my son's business, revealed a long-kept secret, and demanded his presence like a principal summoning a wayward student. But underneath the tumult of the moment, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. I'm better than I've been in a long time, I answered truthfully. When Marcus arrived 52 minutes later, he looked like he had aged years in a single morning. His perfectly tailored suit was uncharacteristically rumpled, his expression a mixture of anger, confusion, and something I hadn't seen in ages. Uncertainty. Grace led him into the conference room where I waited, then discreetly closed the door, leaving us alone. "Sit down, Marcus," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. He remained standing, hands clenched at his sides. "How could you do this? Do you have any idea what this will do to the company? To our reputation? To everything?" "I've built everything we built," I corrected quietly. "With my money, my expertise, my support. And I paid you back. I gave you a job, an office. You gave me a job you systematically stripped of meaning. You gave me an office you repeatedly downsized until I didn't have one at all. You introduced me as Richard from accounting instead of your father. You cut my salary by 40% without discussion. And finally, you asked me to disappear entirely because my existence might make potential investors question your cutting-edge image." He flinched at the catalog of offenses, but his defensiveness didn't waver. "The firm has evolved. Business required changes. If you couldn't keep up..." "This isn't about keeping up, Marcus. It's about respect. It's about recognizing the foundation upon which you've built your success. It's about remembering that before you were the CEO of Horizon Capital, you were... My son and I sacrificed everything to give you the opportunities that got you here." For the first time, his expression faltered. He sank into the chair opposite me, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "So this is revenge?" he asked, his voice smaller. "You're destroying my company because I hurt your feelings?" The question hung between us, revealing just how fundamentally he had misunderstood the situation. And me. "No, Marcus. This isn't revenge. It's a wake-up call." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. "And whether it destroys your company or saves it depends entirely on what happens in this room today." The conference room felt smaller as the weight of our confrontation settled between us. Marcus stared at me, his facade of corporate confidence crumbling around the edges. For the first time in years, he looked young again, almost vulnerable. It reminded me of the night before his first day of high school when he'd sat on the edge of his bed, quietly terrified of what awaited him. "What do you want from me, Dad?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual polish. I considered his question carefully. What did I want? Revenge had never been my goal. Neither was humiliation, though I couldn't deny a certain satisfaction in watching my son reckon with the consequences of his actions. What I truly wanted was something more fundamental. "I want you to remember who you are," I said finally. "Not the CEO, not the financial wunderkind, just you. The person I raised to understand that success means nothing if you sacrifice your humanity to achieve it." He scoffed, though the sound lacked conviction. "So you're teaching me a moral lesson by threatening my entire company? Seems hypocritical, don't you think?" "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But sometimes we need to lose everything to remember what matters." Marcus leaned back in his chair, unconsciously creating distance between us. "Fine. You've made your point. What happens now? What are your terms?" I shook my head slowly. "This isn't a negotiation, Marcus. I'm not here to extort concessions from you." "Then what?" His frustration bubbled over. "You've shut down my office, terrified my employees, and jeopardized client relationships that took years to build. What exactly do you expect me to do with this moral lesson?" I reached into my pocket and withdrew the small stone paperweight he had given me as a child. I placed it on the table between us, his eyes fixed on it, recognition flickering across his features. "You kept that?" he asked quietly. "I've kept everything that mattered," I replied. "Every drawing, every school report, every memento of the person I believed you would become. The question is, what have you kept? What parts of yourself have you preserved through your rise to success?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't have time for this philosophical nonsense. My company is falling apart as we speak. Your company, I repeated. Not our company. Not even with the acknowledgement that it exists because of my investment. Just yours. Built by you, owned by you, credited entirely to you. That's not fair. I've worked incredibly hard. So, have I? I interrupted, my voice remaining calm. For 40 years. First building my own practice, then investing everything in your education, then helping you launch Horizon. The difference is, I never once discounted your contribution. I never made you feel obsolete or unwelcome. A flicker of shame crossed his face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. The business world is changing. If Horizon doesn't evolve, we'll be left behind. I can't run a cutting-edge investment firm based on outdated methods just to spare your feelings. This has never been about sparing my feelings, Marcus. It's about basic human dignity. It's about treating people, especially those who have sacrificed for you, with respect, even as circumstances change. For a moment, he said nothing. The only sound in the room was the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of activity in the law office beyond our door. So what now? He finally asked. You've made your point. Are you going to evict us permanently? Destroy everything I've built to teach me a lesson about respect? I studied my son's face, searching for some glimmer of understanding beneath the fear and anger. That depends on you. What does that mean? It means I'm giving you a choice, not terms, not an ultimatum, a choice about who you want to be going forward. I opened the folder that had been sitting on the table and slid a document toward him. This is a new lease agreement for the building. It maintains all the same financial terms as your current lease, with one significant difference. He scanned the document, his brow furrowing as he reached the key provision. A seat on the Horizon Capital Board of Directors? For you? Yes, not as CEO, not as an executive, but as a board member with full voting rights and access to all company information. A position that cannot be diminished or removed without unanimous board approval. His eyes narrowed. So you're forcing your way back in. I'm ensuring I have a voice that cannot be silently erased, I corrected. A voice that might remind the company, remind you, of the principles upon which it was founded. And if I refuse? Then the eviction stands, I said simply. Horizon Capital will need to find new office space, explain the sudden move to be clients, and deal with the disruption to your operations. The choice is yours. Marcus pushed the document away. This is coercion. No, I countered. This is consequence. For the first time in your adult life, you're facing the natural outcome of your actions. It doesn't feel good, does it? To be powerless? To have someone else determine your professional worth? The barb hit its mark. His expression darkened, but beneath the anger, I caught a glimpse of something else. Recognition. Perhaps even the beginning of understanding. You could have just talked to me, he said, his tone accusatory but softer. Instead of all this. I smiled sadly. I tried, Marcus. Many times, in many ways. You weren't listening. So this was your only option? Nuclear option? Sometimes, I said carefully, we need to lose our foundation to remember what built us in the first place. He ran a hand through his hair again, a childhood habit that emerged only in moments of genuine distress. I need time to think, to consult with my team. The eviction gives you 4 hours, I reminded him, but this conversation doesn't need an immediate answer. Go back to your office, what's left of it. Talk to your team. Consider what kind of company you truly want to build and what kind of person you want to be while building it. I gathered my things and stood to leave. At the door, I turned back to find him still seated, staring at the stone paperweight on the table. For what it's worth, I said quietly. I never stopped believing in you, Marcus. even when you stopped believing in me. I left him there, surrounded by legal documents and childhood memories, to make perhaps the most important decision of his career and our relationship. Outside, the late morning sun cast long shadows across the city streets. I walked without purpose, letting my feet carry me through familiar neighborhoods while my mind processed the confrontation. Had I gone too far? Had my lesson in dignity crossed the line into revenge? I wasn't entirely sure. What I did know was that for the first time in years, I had acted from a place of self-respect rather than self-sacrifice. Whether Marcus understood that distinction would determine everything that came next. I found myself at Riverside Park, a small green space where I used to take Marcus to play catch on Sunday afternoons. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching young parents with their children, the cycle of nurture and growth continuing as it always had. My phone remained silent in my pocket. No frantic calls from Marcus, no legal threats from Horizon's attorneys. Just stillness, the pause between action and consequence. After an hour, I made my way to a small cafe I had frequented during my years running my accounting practice. The owner, Elena, recognized me immediately. "Richard, where have you been hiding yourself? It's been months." "Working," I said with a smile that felt more genuine than any I had managed in recent memory. Though perhaps not anymore. Elena raised an eyebrow as she poured my usual coffee. "Retirement finally calling?" "Something like that," I replied, not quite ready to explain the morning's events. "Let's just say I'm in transition." "Well, transitions deserve cake," she declared, cutting a generous slice of her renowned lemon pound cake and placing it before me, on the house. I thanked her and settled into a corner table, savoring the simple pleasure of good coffee and unexpected kindness. For years, I had defined myself primarily as Marcus's father, then as Horizon's financial backbone. Who was I beyond those roles? What did Richard Harmon, not the father, not the accountant, but the man, want from the years ahead? The question felt like a splinter in my mind, uncomfortable but necessary to examine. I had built my life around supporting others, around being needed. What would it mean to build a life around my own needs, my own desires? My contemplation was interrupted by the chime of my phone. A text message from Grace. "Marcus called, requesting meeting tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., says he needs time to prepare proposal." So, he was buying time. Whether to formulate a genuine response or to plot legal countermeasures remained to be seen. I texted back a simple "agreed" and returned to my coffee. That evening, I returned to my apartment and did something I hadn't done in years. I cleared my dining table of work documents and financial statements. In their place, I spread out old photo albums, journals, and mementos I had kept stored in boxes in my closet. There I was, 36 years younger, holding newborn Marcus in the hospital, my face a mixture of terror and wonder. There we were camping by the lake, his small hand in mine as we stood proudly beside a lopsided tent. Marcus's first business plan, written in pencil at age 12, detailing how his lemonade stand would expand regionally through strategic partnerships with neighborhood kids. I laughed aloud at the memory. Even then, his ambition had been evident, his mind working in terms of growth and expansion. I had encouraged that ambition, nurtured it, believing that success would bring him fulfillment. Had I been wrong? Had my own definition of success, one that valued relationships as much as achievements, failed to transfer to my son? Or had the modern business world simply eroded those values, teaching him that sentiment was weakness, that history was disposable if it didn't serve current objectives? Among the photos, I found a sealed envelope I didn't recognize. My name was written on it in Marcus's adolescent handwriting. I opened it carefully, unfolding a letter written 10 years ago, just before he left for business school. "Dad," it began, "I'm writing this because I'm not good at saying these things out loud. Thank you for everything, not just the money for school, but for believing in me when no one else did. for showing me what it means to work with integrity, for teaching me that how we treat people matters more than any bottom line. I promise I'll make you proud, not just by being successful, but by being the kind of man you've shown me how to be. I love you, Marcus. I stared at the letter, emotions washing over me in waves. Somewhere between this heartfelt promise and today's confrontation, something had been lost. The question was whether it could be found again. I slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with fragments of the past and uncertain visions of the future. Morning came with gray light filtering through my blinds and a resolve that had crystallized during the night's reflections. Today's meeting would not be about punishment or vindication. It would be about possibility. The possibility that beneath the corporate armor my son had constructed, the person I had raised still existed, waiting to be remembered. I arrived at Grace's office 15 minutes early, taking the time to center myself. When Marcus arrived, he was not alone. Beside him walked Elise, his CFO, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of practiced neutrality. "I hope you don't mind that I brought Elise," Marcus said as Grace showed them into the conference room. "As CFO, she needs to be part of any discussion about the company's future." I nodded, noting that he had chosen the word company rather than our company or my company. A small but potentially significant shift. "Of course," I replied. "Good morning, Elise." She nodded professionally. "Mr. Harmon." We settled around the conference table, the atmosphere tense but controlled. Marcus looked better than he had yesterday, still strained, but more composed, as if he had found solid ground amid the upheaval. "I've spent the last 24 hours thinking about everything you said," he began. "About respect, about remembering foundations, about the kind of leader, the kind of person I want to be." I remained silent, giving him space to continue. "I also spent hours with our legal team," he added, a hint of his usual confidence returning. "They believe we have grounds to challenge the eviction, to argue that the lease clause you're citing was hidden in bad faith." "They might be right," I acknowledged, though such a challenge would likely take months to resolve, during which time Horizon would remain without office space. But more importantly, is that really the path you want to take? Legal warfare with your father? Marcus exchanged a glance with Elise, who gave a subtle nod. "No," he said firmly. "That's not the path I want, which is why I've prepared an alternative proposal." He nodded to Elise, who opened her portfolio and distributed documents to each of us. "This is a counterproposal," Marcus explained. "Instead of a board seat, we're offering to create a new position, Chief Ethics Officer and Corporate Historian." I raised an eyebrow at the unusual title. That sounds like a ceremonial role designed to placate me without giving me any actual influence. "It's not," Marcus insisted. "The position would report directly to me, with the explicit purpose of ensuring that Horizon's growth remains aligned with its founding principles. You would have veto power over any policy changes that significantly impact company culture or employee treatment." I scanned the document, which detailed not just responsibilities, but specific authorities the position would hold. "And what prompted this rather creative solution?" Marcus hesitated, then reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He smoothed it on the table. His letter to me from 10 years ago, the one I had discovered just last night. "You kept this," he said, not quite a question. "Of course I did." "I found my copy yesterday evening. I've had it in my desk drawer all these years." He met my gaze directly. "I reread it after our meeting. Then I read it to Elise and our executive team." I glanced at Elise, whose professional veneer had softened slightly. "It was illuminating," she admitted, "to understand the principles upon which Horizon was actually founded. After that," Marcus continued, "I asked everyone to leave except Elise. and we had a long conversation about what kind of company we've been building, about efficiency versus humanity, about progress that leaves people behind. He took a deep breath. I realized that somewhere along the way, I started measuring success solely by metrics that could be quantified: assets under management, client acquisition rates, profit margins. I stopped measuring the things that matter most: integrity, loyalty, gratitude. For the first time since our confrontation began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not just for Horizon Capital or my place within it, but for my son, for the person I had raised him to be. The position we're proposing isn't symbolic, Marcus insisted. It's essential, because I've realized that without someone consistently advocating for our human foundation, Horizon will become just another soulless financial institution. That's not what I want to build. That's not who I want to be. I studied him carefully, looking beyond the polished exterior to the subtle signs I had known since his childhood. The slight tension in his jaw when he was being completely honest. The direct eye contact he maintained when speaking from conviction, rather than calculation. And what happens when your next big client or investor questions why you keep an aging accountant with outdated methods in your executive suite? I asked. Will you ask me to disappear then? Marcus flinched at having his own words reflected back to him, but he didn't look away. No, because I'll be able to explain that our corporate historian ensures we never forget where we came from, and that our chief ethics officer ensures we don't sacrifice who we are for where we're going. There was sincerity in his voice that I hadn't heard in years. Not the practiced sincerity he used in client meetings, but something rawer, more authentic. And if I decline this offer? I asked. Then the company moves, he answered simply. We find new office space, we weather the disruption, and we move forward, without the benefit of your wisdom or your reminder of our foundations. He leaned forward. But I hope you accept, not for Horizon's sake, but for mine. Because I've realized that in pushing you away, I wasn't just losing an experienced accountant. I was losing my compass. The metaphor struck me deeply. A compass, not a burden, not a relic, but an instrument of guidance, essential for navigation through challenging terrain. I'd like some time to consider your proposal, I said finally. Of course, Marcus nodded. The building is yours. We'll abide by whatever timeline you set. As we prepared to conclude the meeting, Marcus paused. There's one more thing. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small wooden box. I was going to give you this at your retirement party, the one we never got around to planning. He placed the box between us. Inside was a watch, not flashy or ostentatious, but elegant and clearly of significant quality. Turn it over, he instructed softly. I lifted the watch and read the inscription on the back. Time given is never wasted. Thank you for giving me yours. Marcus. When did you have this made? I asked, my voice unexpectedly thick. 6 months ago, he admitted. Before things changed. I had it specially commissioned. I always intended to honor your retirement. Properly. But then we got busy with the expansion and new clients demanded attention and somehow, it never seemed like the right moment. I studied the watch, running my thumb over the inscription. 6 months ago, when I still had a proper office before the salary cut, before I became inconvenient, there had been intention there, recognition of my value. Somewhere along the way, ambition had overshadowed that intention. Thank you, I said, carefully returning the watch to its box. It's beautiful. As Grace showed them out, I remained seated, contemplating the watch, the proposed position, and most importantly, the glimpse of my son I had seen beneath the corporate armor. The person who still remembered what I had taught. Him about success with integrity, about valuing people above profits. The compass metaphor lingered in my thoughts. Perhaps that was indeed the role I was meant to play in this next chapter. not as the foundation that had already been laid, but as the instrument that would help navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. Later that afternoon, I called Marcus. "I accept your proposal," I said without preamble, "with one condition." "Name it," he replied, relief evident in his voice. "The position reports not just to you, but to the full board. My evaluations and recommendations become part of the official corporate record, available to all stakeholders." There was a moment of silence as he considered the implications. Such transparency would create accountability that couldn't be easily dismissed or marginalized. "Agreed," he said finally. "When can you start?" I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose that had been missing for too long. "I never stopped, Marcus. I was just waiting for you to remember why that matters." The transformation of Horizon Capital began not with grand announcements or corporate restructuring, but with small, deliberate changes that rippled outward. My first day as Chief Ethics Officer and Corporate Historian started simply, I arrived. At the building that was once again bustling with Horizon employees, my new security badge granting me full access to all floors and departments. Marcus had arranged for my office to be relocated to the executive floor, not the windowless storage room or the shared workspace, but a proper office with large windows overlooking the river. As I stepped inside, I noticed it had been thoughtfully prepared. My degrees and certifications hung on the wall, alongside framed photos of Marcus and me from various stages of our journey together. On the desk sat a new nameplate, Richard Harmon, Chief Ethics Officer and Corporate Historian. What struck me most, however, was the glass display case against one wall. Inside were artifacts from Horizon's founding. The original business plan I had helped Marcus craft, the first dollar earned from our initial client, newspaper clippings about the company's early successes. Our history, preserved and honored, rather than hidden away. Elise appeared in my doorway, a tablet in hand. "The executive team meeting starts in 15 minutes, she informed me. "Marcus asked that you join us." I nodded, noting the shift in her demeanor. Gone was the subtle condescension that had colored our previous interactions. In its place was something approaching respectful collegiality. The executive conference room was filled with familiar faces, the senior team I had once been part of before my gradual exclusion. As I entered, conversations paused momentarily, curious glances exchanged. Marcus, at the head of the table, stood. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice carrying a confidence I recognized but with a new undercurrent of humility. "Before we begin, I want to officially welcome Richard Harmon to his new position as Chief Ethics Officer and Corporate Historian." He gestured toward me. "Some of you know Richard primarily as my father. Others know him as the accountant who helped establish our financial systems. What you all should know is that without his investment, his expertise, and his guidance, Horizon Capital would not exist." The room fell silent, all eyes now on me. "In our pursuit of growth," Marcus continued, "we sometimes lose sight of our foundations. Richard's role will ensure that doesn't happen. That we remember not just what we're building, but why and how we're building it." He met my gaze directly. "His perspective will be valued in all major decisions moving forward. Not as a courtesy, but as an essential component of our success." With that introduction, the meeting proceeded. Budget projections, client acquisitions, strategic initiatives. But something had shifted in the dynamic. When I offered observations or asked questions, they were met with genuine consideration rather than polite dismissal. Near the end of the meeting, Marcus introduced a new agenda item: Company Culture Assessment. "Richard will be conducting interviews across all departments," he explained. "The goal is to evaluate how well our practices align with our stated values. I expect everyone to participate fully and encourage your teams to speak candidly." Elise raised an eyebrow. "Will these assessments impact performance evaluations?" Not individual evaluations, I clarified, but they will influence departmental priorities and resource allocations. Companies that align values with practices consistently outperform those that don't. This isn't just about feeling good, it's about sustainable success. The executives nodded, some with enthusiasm, others with measured reservation. Change, especially cultural change, rarely comes without resistance. As the meeting concluded, I felt a familiar sensation, the quiet satisfaction of being truly useful, of contributing value that was uniquely mine to give. It had been missing for too long. Over the following weeks, I immersed myself in Horizon's operations, conducting interviews with employees at every level. I spoke with analysts who had been with the company since its founding and new hires still, learning the culture. I sat with the maintenance staff who kept the building running and the client services team who maintained our most valuable relationships. What emerged was a complex portrait of a company in transition, one that had achieved remarkable financial success while gradually eroding the human connections that made that success meaningful. The early days were different, explained Chen, a senior analyst who had been one of Marcus's first hires. We were a team then, all pulling in the same direction. Everyone knew why their work mattered. And now? I prompted. He hesitated. Now it feels like we're cogs in a machine. Replaceable parts expected to perform without asking why. I heard variations of this sentiment repeatedly. A yearning for purpose beyond profit, for connection beyond transaction. It wasn't just sentimentality. It was a fundamental human need that, when unmet, inevitably led to diminished performance and increased turnover. 4 weeks into my assessment, I presented my preliminary findings to Marcus and the executive team. I had prepared detailed analytics, correlating employee satisfaction with client retention and productivity metrics. The data told a compelling story. Departments that scored highest on cultural alignment consistently outperformed those that didn't, even when controlling for all other variables. This isn't surprising, I concluded, but it is quantifiable. When people understand how their work contributes to something meaningful, when they feel valued as individuals rather than just functional units, they invest more of themselves in the outcome. Marcus studied the data, nodding thoughtfully. So, what do you recommend? A cultural reset, I replied. Not cosmetic changes, foosball tables and free snacks, but fundamental realignment with the principles that built this company. Transparency in decision-making, recognition of contribution at all levels, professional development that values growth over competition. That sounds expensive, noted the CFO, a recent hire who had yet to fully embrace the new direction. Less expensive than the talent we're losing, I countered, sliding forward another report. Exit interviews show we've lost 12 high-performing employees in the past year, primarily citing culture as their reason for leaving. The cost of replacing them exceeds the investment I'm proposing by roughly 300%. The room grew quiet as the executives absorbed the implications. I want a comprehensive plan on my desk by the end of the week, Marcus decided. Budget allocations, implementation timeline, success metrics. This becomes a top priority. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus asked me to stay behind. When we were alone, he leaned against the conference table, arms crossed in a gesture reminiscent of his teenage years when preparing to admit a mistake. I underestimated the damage, he said quietly. I thought our culture was strong enough to withstand the pace of our growth. I was wrong. Culture isn't self-sustaining, I reminded him. It requires constant attention, especially during periods of expansion. When you prioritize metrics over meaning, people notice, and they respond accordingly. He nodded, running, a hand through his hair. We can fix this, right? The question carried more vulnerability than I had heard from him in years. Not the calculated vulnerability he sometimes displayed to clients, but genuine uncertainty, a son asking his father for reassurance. Yes, I said firmly. We can fix this. But it won't happen overnight, and it won't happen without your visible commitment. People are watching you, Marcus. Every decision, every interaction signals what truly matters at Horizon. I understand, he replied, and for the first time in a long while, I believed he did. The cultural reset began the following Monday with an all-hands meeting, the first in Horizon's history to include every employee, from executives to maintenance staff. Marcus stood at the center of the gathering. No podium, no slides, just direct engagement. For the past 5 years, he began, I've measured Horizon's success by numbers: assets under management, profit margins, client acquisition rates. Those metrics matter, but they're not the only measures that matter. He glanced at me briefly before continuing. I recently learned a powerful lesson about foundations, about remembering what you build upon and who you build with. It wasn't an easy lesson. In fact, it came with significant professional and personal cost. A ripple of whispers spread through the gathering. The sudden office closure and equally sudden reopening had generated countless rumors, but no official explanation had been provided until now. The truth is, Marcus continued, I lost sight of what makes Horizon special. Not our investment strategies or our client roster, but our people, the individuals who bring their talent, their creativity, and their humanity to work each day. He introduced my new role, explaining that the cultural assessment I had conducted would guide significant changes in how Horizon operated moving forward. He outlined new initiatives, mentorship programs, transparent communication channels, collaborative decision-making processes, all designed to reconnect individual contribution with collective purpose. These aren't optional programs or HR initiatives, he emphasized. They're fundamental to how we'll operate, because a company that forgets its humanity inevitably loses its way, and eventually, its success. As the meeting concluded, I noticed something remarkable in the faces around me, a cautious rekindling of hope, of engagement, of belief that perhaps Horizon could be both successful and meaningful, both profitable and purposeful. The months that followed brought both challenges and breakthroughs. Not every initiative succeeded. Some required adjustment, others complete rethinking. The CFO who had questioned the investment eventually departed, replaced by someone who better understood the connection between culture and performance. My role evolved as well. Beyond monitoring ethical alignment, I began mentoring promising employees who demonstrated leadership potential. I established a roundtable program where staff from different departments shared perspectives on improving client experiences. I created an archive documenting Horizon's journey, not just the triumphs but the missteps and recoveries, the lessons that shaped our growth. 6 months into the cultural reset, Marcus suggested a new tradition: monthly dinners with employees, selected from across the organization, hosted at his home. No agenda, he explained, just connection. I want to know who's building Horizon with us, not just what they're contributing. The first dinner was awkward. Junior analysts and administrative staff clearly uncomfortable in the CEO's modernist dining room. But as Marcus shared stories from Horizon's early days, as he asked questions about their lives beyond work and listened with genuine interest to their answers, the atmosphere gradually warmed. By dessert, conversation flowed naturally. One analyst even dared to suggest improvements to a client reporting system Marcus had personally designed. Rather than becoming defensive, Marcus grabbed a notepad and asked for elaboration. That's brilliant, he acknowledged after hearing the full concept. Much better than my approach. Can you lead a team to implement it? The analyst's surprise quickly gave way to enthusiasm. Absolutely. I've actually been thinking about this for months. Why didn't you bring it up before? I asked. He hesitated, then answered honestly. I didn't think anyone would listen. The exchange exemplified both how far we had come and how far we still had to go in rebuilding a culture where every voice mattered. where improvement could come from anywhere in the organization. As the dinner guests departed, Marcus and I remained at the table, nursing glasses of scotch in companionable silence. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about success, about legacy." "Heavy topics for a Thursday evening," I observed with a smile. He chuckled. "Maybe, but necessary ones." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, gathering his thoughts. "I've always defined success in terms of achievement. Companies built, deals closed, wealth accumulated. But lately, I've been wondering if that's too limited a definition." "What would you add to it?" I asked, curious about where his reflection was leading. "Impact," he replied thoughtfully. "Not just financial impact, but human impact. The lives we touch, the potential we help unlock, the values we strengthen or weaken through our actions." I nodded, recognizing in his words the evolution of his thinking, from accumulation to contribution, from personal achievement to collective advancement. "That's a more sustainable definition," I noted. "Achievement alone is a moving target. There's always more to acquire, higher to climb. But impact, that compounds over time, continues beyond your direct involvement." "Like your impact on me," Marcus said quietly. "Even when I wasn't acknowledging it, even when I was actively devaluing it, your influence was still shaping who I am, how I think." The admission touched something deep within me, a father's hope that his guidance would endure even through periods of rejection or rebellion. "I was angry after our confrontation," he continued. "Felt ambushed, manipulated. But once that passed, I recognized what you were really doing, forcing me to reconcile who I claimed to be with how I was actually behaving. No one else in my life would have done that. No one else could have." "That's what fathers do," I said simply. "Hold up mirrors when you've lost sight of yourself." He smiled, raising his glass slightly. "To uncomfortable reflections that lead to necessary growth." I raised mine in return. "To foundations that prove their worth when tested." A year after my appointment as Chief Ethics Officer, Horizon Capital was noticeably transformed. Our client base had actually grown, attracted by our reputation for integrity as much as our performance metrics. Employee retention had improved dramatically. Our initiatives had been featured in business publications as a model for sustainable growth in the financial sector. On the anniversary of my new role, Marcus called an all-staff meeting. The gathering was different from previous ones, more relaxed, more connected, a community rather than merely a collection of employees. Marcus stood before them, projecting confidence balanced with the humility he had relearned over the past year. "Today marks an important milestone," he began. "A year ago, we embarked on what some considered a risky experiment, prioritizing our human foundation alongside our financial objectives. Many questioned whether a company could truly succeed while refusing to treat people as replaceable assets." He gestured to screens displaying our annual results. "The numbers speak for themselves. Our client retention is at an all-time high. Our employee satisfaction scores have increased 47%. Our profitability has grown 22%, while our industry averaged 8%. Applause rippled through the gathering, but Marcus raised a hand. "Those metrics matter, but they're not what I'm most proud of." He turned to where I stood at the side of the room. "What makes me proudest is that we've built a company where someone like my father, someone with decades of wisdom, with unwavering integrity, with a commitment to seeing people beyond their functional value, is not just tolerated, but essential to our identity." He invited me to join him at the center of the gathering. As I stepped forward, he continued, "A year ago, I made the mistake of calling this man a burden. I dismissed his contribution because it didn't fit my narrow definition of value. In doing so, I nearly lost both a father and a foundation." The room grew quiet, employees listening intently to their CEO's unexpected vulnerability. What I've learned since then, what Richard has helped all of us learn, is that true success isn't built on discarding the old to embrace the new. It's built on integrating wisdom with innovation, experience with fresh perspective, proven principles, with evolving practices. He turned to face me directly. You asked me once what I wanted from you. I didn't have a good answer then. I do now. I want your wisdom, your perspective, your unflinching commitment to treating people as whole human beings, not just productive units. That hasn't become less valuable as we've grown. It's become more essential. The recognition was powerful not because it came publicly, but because it came authentically, earned through a year of rebuilding what had been broken, of relearning what had been forgotten. After the meeting, as employees dispersed with renewed purpose, Marcus and I walked to my office. The display case of Horizon's artifacts had expanded over the year, now including documentation of our cultural reset alongside the original founding materials. We should add something new, Marcus suggested, removing his watch, the one I had given him when he graduated business school. He placed it carefully in the case. To remind us that time is our most valuable asset, not just how we spend it, but who we spend it with. I nodded, understanding the symbolism. Then I reached into my pocket and withdrew my own watch, the one he had given me with the inscription about time given never being wasted. I placed it beside his in the display. Together, I said. Past and present, foundation and future. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I paused at my window overlooking the city. Lights were coming on in buildings across the skyline, each representing countless human stories unfolding. Ambitions pursued, relationships tested, lessons learned or forgotten. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from young accountant to father to nearly discarded advisor to essential guide. Each phase had shaped me, challenged me, revealed aspects of myself I might never have discovered otherwise. The greatest revelation had been this. True value isn't determined by market trends or contemporary preferences. It isn't measured by titles or salaries. It resides in the irreplaceable wisdom that comes only through lived experience, through challenges faced and overcome, through principles tested and proven over time. My son had needed to lose his foundation to remember why it mattered. I had needed to reclaim my dignity to remember my own worth. Together, we had discovered that the most powerful legacy isn't built on achievement alone, but on impact that continues beyond our direct involvement, rippling outward through lives touched, potential unlocked and values reinforced. As I turned to leave, I noticed a small plaque that had been mounted beside my office door. It hadn't been there that morning. I leaned closer to read the inscription. The true measure of a foundation is not how well it supports what's built upon it, but how well it endures when tested. Marcus's handwriting, his understanding, his acknowledgement that some lessons can only be learned through difficult experience, and that those who guide us through such lessons aren't burdens but beacons, illuminating paths we might otherwise miss in our hurried journey forward. Touched the plaque lightly, smiling at this tangible symbol of our transformation, both professional and personal. Then I turned off my office light and stepped into the future we were building together, one deliberate choice at a time. The transformation of Horizon Capital continued to flourish beyond that first anniversary, evolving in ways neither Marcus nor I could have fully anticipated. What began as a necessary intervention had blossomed into something revolutionary, not just for our company, but for our entire industry. 3 years after that pivotal confrontation in Marcus's office, I stood at the podium of the National Financial Ethics Conference, addressing a room filled with industry leaders, academics, and policymakers. My journey from financial burden to keynote speaker embodied the very principles I now advocated. The most dangerous phrase in business, I began, scanning the attentive faces before me, is, "That's just how things are done." These 7 words have justified exploitation, silenced innovation, and perpetuated systems that value short-term profit over long-term sustainability. I paused, letting the statement resonate. At Horizon Capital, we discovered something counterintuitive. When you refuse to accept, that's just how things are done. When you intentionally integrate ethical considerations with financial objectives, you don't sacrifice profitability. You enhance it. Slides appeared behind me, showcasing Horizon's remarkable growth metrics since our cultural transformation. While our competitors had experienced average annual growth of 11%, Horizon had consistently delivered 24% growth while maintaining the highest employee retention rate in the industry. These aren't coincidental correlations, I emphasized. They're causal relationships. When people understand how their work contributes to something meaningful, when they feel valued as complex human beings rather than replaceable assets, they bring their full creativity and commitment to every challenge. From the front row, Marcus watched with evident pride. At 42, he had matured into a different kind of leader than the ambitious young CEO who had once dismissed me. His sharp business acumen remained, but it was now balanced with authentic empathy and perspective that made him both respected and beloved by his team. As my presentation concluded, I introduced our newest initiative, the Horizon Legacy Project. We're committing $20 million over 5 years to reimagine financial education, I explained. Not just investment strategies or market analysis, but the fundamental question of how wealth creation can serve human flourishing rather than diminishing it. The announcement generated immediate buzz throughout the audience. Such a substantial commitment to ethical financial education was unprecedented in our industry, where philanthropy typically focused on more conventional causes. During the reception that followed, I found myself surrounded by industry colleagues eager to understand how Horizon had achieved its remarkable transformation. Many were skeptical, searching for simple techniques they could implement without fundamentally changing their approach. There's no shortcut, I explained to the CEO of a competing firm. No 5-step program or quick fix. The change has to be authentic, starting with genuine self-reflection about what kind of legacy you want to create. But the shareholders, he began, the familiar refrain of quarterly pressures and market expectations, will benefit more from sustainable growth than from extractive practices that inevitably collapse, I finished for him. Our shareholders have seen their value increase consistently because we've built something people want to be part of, both employees and clients. As the crowd thinned, Marcus approached with 2 glasses of scotch. Quite the rock star, Dad, he teased, handing me one. You've got the entire financial district reconsidering their approach, I chuckled. Most of them are just looking for the magic formula that doesn't require actual change. Isn't that always the way? He gestured toward a quiet corner where we could speak privately. I've been thinking about the next phase, he said once we were settled. For the legacy project? For us, he clarified. For Horizon's leadership, structure. Something in his tone caught my attention. What are you considering? Marcus took a contemplative sip of his scotch. I'm thinking it's time for me to step aside as CEO. I nearly choked on my drink. What? Why? Horizon is thriving. Under your leadership. Exactly, he nodded. It's stable, profitable, culturally aligned, which makes it the perfect time for transition, while things are strong, not during crisis. I studied him carefully, searching for signs of burnout or frustration. Instead, I found clear-eyed purpose. You have something specific in mind. I do, he confirmed. I want to focus exclusively on the legacy project, expand it beyond education into policy advocacy, institutional reform, the systemic changes needed to transform how finance serves society. And Horizon? Elise is ready, he said simply. She's internalized everything we've built culturally while maintaining her strategic brilliance. The board agrees she's the natural successor. I considered his proposition. Elise had, indeed, flourished during our transformation, evolving from a numbers-focused CFO to a holistic leader who understood that financial health required human health. Still, this was an unexpected pivot. What prompted this? I asked. 3 years ago, Horizon was your entire identity. Marcus smiled reflectively. That's precisely it. 3 years ago, I couldn't separate my worth from my title. I defined success so narrowly that I was willing to discard even my own father when he didn't fit my vision of progress. He set his glass down, leaning forward intently. But you taught me something profound when you changed the locks on my office. You showed me that true power doesn't come from position or control. It comes from purpose, from knowing what matters, and having the courage to prioritize it, even when conventional wisdom says otherwise. The wisdom in his words struck me deeply. My son had indeed transformed, evolving beyond the trappings of corporate status to embrace a more meaningful conception of impact. I'm proud of you, I said simply. He laughed warmly. That's all I ever wanted to hear, you know. Even at my worst, when I was pushing you away, some part of me was still that little boy hoping his father was proud. I've always been proud, I assured him. Even when I was disappointed in your choices, I never stopped being proud of your potential. The distinction resonated with him. That's the difference, isn't it? Seeing people for who they can become, not just who they are in their worst moments. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the reception continuing around us. Finally, Marcus spoke. Again, his tone thoughtful. There's something else I want to propose. Another change to our leadership structure. I'm listening. I want you to become chairman of the board. The suggestion caught me completely by surprise. Chairman? Marcus, I'm 71. Most companies are looking for ways to bring in younger leadership, not elevating people my age to the highest governance position. Exactly why it's so necessary, he countered. Most companies are missing the stabilizing wisdom that comes only through lived experience. They're chasing innovation without foundation, novelty without depth. You would provide something irreplaceable, the long view that sees beyond quarterly reports or annual trends. I considered his proposal carefully. The chairman role would be different from my current position, less operational, more focused on governance and strategic direction. It would allow me to shape Horizon's future while creating space for the next generation of leadership to flourish. I'll think about it, I promised. That's all I ask, Marcus replied. Just know that this isn't charity or sentimentality. The board has discussed it extensively. They recognize what I learned the hard way, that your perspective is invaluable, precisely because it doesn't echo the prevailing wisdom of the moment. 2 months later, the transitions were announced publicly. Marcus stepping aside as CEO to lead the expanded legacy project, Elise assuming the chief executive role with unanimous board support, and me, accepting the position of chairman, becoming the eldest board leader in our industry at a time when youth was typically prized over experience. The business press covered the announcements extensively, most focusing on the unusual nature of our leadership decisions. Horizon Capital defies convention again, read one headline. Is this the future of succession planning? Questioned another. What the articles couldn't capture was the profound sense of rightness that accompanied these changes. Each of us, stepping into roles that maximized our unique contributions, creating a leadership ecosystem where different perspectives and capacities could complement each other, rather than competing for dominance. The day after the public announcement, I arrived at the office to find my new chairman's suite prepared. Unlike the typical corporate boardroom aesthetic of imposing mahogany and leather, this space had been thoughtfully designed to reflect my personal approach. Comfortable seating arranged for conversation rather than hierarchy, shelves lined with books that had influenced my thinking, walls adorned with images of architectural foundations from around the world. On the central table lay a single envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Marcus. The foundation must be honored, especially when building something that reaches for the sky. With deepest gratitude for bearing the weight while we find our height. M. I smiled at the metaphor, so fitting for the journey we had traveled together. From dismissal to recognition, from burden to bedrock, the transformation had been as personal as it was professional. That afternoon, I convened my first board meeting as chairman. The assembled directors represented diverse backgrounds and perspectives, the result of intentional efforts to build governance that reflected the complexity of the world we served, rather than the homogeneity that often characterized financial leadership. Thank you for your confidence, I began. As we enter this new chapter, I want to establish a foundational principle for our governance approach. All eyes focused on me, including Marcus's, now present as a board member rather than CEO. In every decision we face, we will ask not just, is this profitable? But is this worthy? Worthy of the trust our clients place in us, worthy of the commitment our employees make to us, worthy of the influence we have in shaping what business can and should be in society. I glanced around the table, noting the thoughtful nods of agreement. This isn't about sacrificing financial performance for abstract ideals. It's about recognizing that lasting value is created only when ethics and economics align, when how we achieve matters as much as what we achieve. The meeting proceeded with robust discussion of strategic initiatives, market opportunities, and emerging challenges. What struck me most was the quality of dialogue, the willingness to consider multiple perspectives, to challenge assumptions constructively, to think beyond immediate returns to longer horizons of impact. This was governance as it should be. Wisdom guiding power, experience informing innovation, principle directing profit. In the months that followed, our unconventional leadership model attracted increasing attention. Business schools requested case studies. Industry publications sought interviews. Competing firms began quietly restructuring their own boards to include more diverse perspectives, including bringing back experienced leaders they had previously marginalized. The most meaningful validation, however, came not from external recognition, but from internal flourishing. Under Elise's operational leadership, Horizon continued to innovate and expand. With Marcus directing the Legacy Project, our impact on financial education and policy reform grew exponentially. And with my guidance as chairman, our governance maintained the long view that ensured decisions served not just quarterly objectives, but generational aspirations. 1 year into our new structure, Horizon was invited to participate in the World Economic Forum. Marcus and I traveled to Davos together, father and son representing a new model of financial leadership on the global stage. The night before our panel presentation, we walked through the snow-covered streets of the Alpine village, breath clouding in the crisp air. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the surrounding mountains illuminated by moonlight. "Speaking to world leaders about ethical finance?" I shook my head, smiling. "When you called me a burden in your office 4 years ago, this wasn't exactly the future I envisioned." He winced slightly at the memory. "That moment haunts me sometimes, how close I came to losing everything that truly matters." "It was necessary," I reflected. "Painful, but necessary. We both needed that confrontation to break patterns that weren't serving either of us." "Still," he insisted, "I wish I could erase those words. Take back the hurt they caused." I stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Don't wish that. Not for a moment. Without that rock bottom, we wouldn't have discovered the foundation beneath it. Without that wound, we wouldn't have found the healing that made us stronger." He considered this, snow gently falling around us. "You're saying our worst moments can become catalysts for our best evolution?" "Only if we have the courage to face them honestly," I nodded, "to ask what they reveal about what needs to change within us." The following morning, we addressed A packed auditorium of political leaders, corporate executives, and social innovators. Our panel, titled Regenerative Finance Beyond Sustainability, explored how financial systems could be redesigned to create positive social and environmental value rather than merely reducing harm. Marcus spoke with passion about the Legacy Project's efforts to reimagine financial education. I shared insights about governance structures that could align profit with purpose. Together, we painted a vision of finance as a regenerative force in society rather than an extractive one. During the question period, a CEO from a major investment bank asked the question that had followed us throughout our journey. Isn't this all just idealism? In the real world of quarterly expectations and competitive pressures, can these principles actually scale? I exchanged a glance with Marcus before responding. 4 years ago, I might have shared your skepticism. In fact, I was forcibly retired from my son's firm precisely because my outdated approaches were deemed incompatible with cutting-edge finance. A murmur of interest rippled through the audience. Today, I'm chairman of that same firm, which has outperformed market averages by 13% annually while maintaining the highest employee engagement scores in our sector. So when you ask if these principles can scale, my answer is simple. They're the only things that truly do scale, because they align with fundamental human needs for meaning, connection, and contribution. Marcus leaned toward his microphone. Let me add something my father taught me, though I didn't appreciate it until I nearly lost both him and the foundation of our company. True innovation isn't about discarding wisdom for novelty. It's about integrating timeless principles with emerging possibilities. When we elevate metrics over meaning, efficiency over ethics, we don't advance, we diminish, creating systems that ultimately collapse under the weight of their own disconnection from human reality. The simplicity and conviction of his statement resonated throughout the hall, generating spontaneous applause that surprised even us. Later that evening, at a reception overlooking the mountains, we were approached by leaders from across industries and sectors, all curious about the Horizon model, all seeking insights for their own organizations. What struck me most powerfully in these conversations was how universal our story actually was. The tension between innovation and foundation, between progress and preservation, between efficiency and humanity, these weren't unique to finance or to our particular father-son relationship. They were fundamental tensions inherent in all human enterprises, in all efforts to build something meaningful that endures beyond individual contribution. As the reception wound down, a journalist approached for one final question. After everything you've experienced, what's the most important lesson other organizations should take from Horizon's journey? I considered carefully before answering. That value doesn't depreciate with age or experience. That wisdom earned through challenge is irreplaceable. That the most dangerous words in business aren't, "This has failed," but "This is no longer relevant." Marcus nodded in agreement, adding, "And that sometimes the person you're most tempted to dismiss as a burden might actually be the foundation you can't afford to lose." The journalist thanked us and departed, leaving us alone on the balcony, overlooking the village lights twinkling against mountain shadows. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Brightness against darkness, illumination emerging from contrast, perspective revealed only through distance. "We've come a long way," Marcus observed quietly. "Not just in miles," I agreed. He turned to face me, expression earnest in the dim light. "Thank you for changing the locks that day. Thank you for having the courage to show me what I was losing before it was truly lost. Thank you for having the wisdom to see it as an opportunity rather than just an obstacle," I replied. Most people, when confronted with their mistakes, become defensive. You became determined to understand, to change, to grow. Marcus smiled. I had a good example to follow. As we stood there, father and son watching night settle over the mountains, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. from a painful confrontation in a glass office to an international stage advocating for transformation. From financial burden to irreplaceable foundation. From broken relationship to strengthened partnership. The path hadn't been easy. It had required courage from both of us. Courage to confront, courage to change, courage to forgive, courage to rebuild. But that difficult journey had created something neither of us could have built alone. A model of leadership that honored experience while embracing innovation, that valued wisdom while pursuing progress, that recognized how much we need both, foundation and aspiration, to create anything truly meaningful and lasting. In the end, the locks I changed weren't just on physical doors. They were on old patterns of thinking, on limited definitions of value, on narrow conceptions of what constitutes success, and in opening new doors to honest dialogue, to mutual respect, to integrated purpose. We had discovered that the most powerful legacy isn't built on what we accumulate or achieve, but on how courageously we face our failures, and how wholeheartedly we engage the challenging work of transformation. That was the story beneath our story, the truth that had changed everything. Sometimes being called a burden becomes the very gift that reveals your irreplaceable value. If you have the courage to claim it, to demonstrate it, and to offer it, in service of something greater than yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.